chapel smelled of old wood and lilies, the kind of scent that settles deep in your memory, clinging to silence. My black lace gloves trembled over clasped hands, and my head remained bowed beneath the long veil. Not from grief but from intention. I didn't want anyone to recognize me, not yet. At the front of the room, my younger brother Brandon stood confidently behind the podium, delivering a eulogy that sounded more like a business pitch than a farewell. His voice was steady, performative, the same tone he used when closing deals. "Our father built everything we are today," he declared. "He taught us strength, discipline, legacy." I closed my eyes. What strength? What family? The only thing our father, Richard Lane, ever taught me was how to survive when the people who should love you the most act like you don't exist. They didn't push me out, I simply vanished quietly. No confrontations, no scenes. Just silence. No seat at Christmas dinner, no response to birthday cards. They never asked why. Maybe they preferred it that way. It's easier to forget someone if you pretend they were never there. But I had never truly left, not in the way they believed. Now I was here, veiled and silent, bearing witness to the end of a man who once looked me in the eye and told me I was a mistake. The chapel was full. Brandon's perfect wife, Jenna, sat in the front row with their 3 matching children, dressed like a family from a catalog. Old business partners nodded, neighbors, church acquaintances. No one noticed me, until Mr. Wilkins, the family attorney, stepped up and cleared his throat. In accordance with Mr. Lane's revised will, dated 6 months ago, Meredith Lane is to inherit the Lane Vineyard and all holdings associated with the Caroline Lane Trust. My name. The silence cracked. Then the room turned, all at once, and looked at the woman they thought had disappeared. I didn't flinch. I let the silence speak. Long before the veil, the silence, and the betrayal, I had a place in that house. I wasn't always invisible. As a little girl, I believed my father, Richard Lane, was a man who controlled the stars. He wasn't affectionate, not like other dads, but when he acknowledged you, it felt like standing in sunlight. He didn't read bedtime stories or ask about my dreams, but once, when I was 7, he handed me a leather-bound notebook and said, "Write down what matters. Don't waste time with the rest." I carried that notebook everywhere like a relic. But if my father was the foundation, my mother Caroline was the light. She made everything warmer just by being there. She taught me how to braid hair, how to keep secrets, how to bake the perfect apple pie from scratch. She once whispered to me, "You're more like me than you think, Meredith. Quiet things can be powerful too." I believed her. Most weekends as a teenager, I helped her in the vineyard. Back then, it was a modest place, nothing like the polished estate it became later. But it was ours. She taught me how to read soil moisture, how to track grape rotations, and even let me name our first signature bottle, Caroline's Light. I remember thinking I'd spend my life there, that one day I'd pass the vines to my children. It felt certain. Brandon was 10 years younger than me, a sweet, curious boy who trailed me like a shadow. But as he grew, things changed. He became louder, flashier. Our father adored that. He used to say, "That boy's a natural leader." I smiled and nodded, but it stung. Still, we were a family. Our birthdays were chaotic and joyful. Holidays smelled of cinnamon and fresh bread. I was the one who wrapped every gift with hand-cut ribbons and labeled tags. They teased me for being too sentimental, but they depended on it. I was the glue. The problem is, no one notices glue until it's gone. And when my mother died, everything cracked. One day she was in the kitchen, prepping lunch. The next, she was gone. The house didn't just get quieter, it got colder. And I began to fade from the picture like an old photograph, left too long in the sun. After my mother passed, I tried to hold everything together. I took over the vineyard's books. I made dinner for my father. I checked in on staff. I baked the cinnamon rolls my mother used to make every Sunday. I did it not because anyone asked, but because I couldn't bear the silence she left behind. My father, though, became distant. More than grieving, he closed himself off. He barely spoke. When I asked if he wanted help with planning the memorial, he said, "It's not necessary. Brandon's handling it." And that became the pattern. Brandon stepped in like a hero returning from exile. Fresh out of business school with a polished suit and a bright, convincing smile. He brought in advisors. He started restructuring operations. The branding changed. The labels I had hand-designed were replaced with minimalist logos. The tasting room playlist turned from jazz to ambient lounge. And our father, he applauded all of it. Brandon was praised for being visionary. I was told to focus on what I enjoy. At first, I told myself it was temporary, that Brandon was just taking pressure off my father's shoulders. I still helped in small ways, watering the garden, checking in on the harvest staff, baking for Sunday dinners that no one invited me to anymore. But bit by bit, I was pushed out. I was asked not to attend board meetings unless absolutely necessary. Then the bookkeeping software login changed. My mother's framed recipe in the kitchen disappeared. And finally, the label Caroline's Light was discontinued, replaced by a bold new cabernet called Dynasty. The message couldn't have been clearer. They wanted a legacy that looked like success, not sentiment. And in their eyes, I had become obsolete. Still, I held on. I clung to any task I could. I kept hoping that effort and presence would be enough. That love forgotten or buried might somehow find its way back. But the love I remembered was fading. And in its place grew a bitter kind of efficiency. One that had no room left for me. It didn't happen all at once. That's the thing with emotional erasure, it moves like fog, slow and certain, until you can't see the road behind you. I kept showing up. That was my rebellion. I brought casseroles to my father. I sent cards to my nephews. I dropped off wine bottles Jenna might like, hoping for a thank you. I left voicemails that were never returned. I texted happy birthday, even when it went unread. No one pushed me out with cruelty. That would have been easier. Instead, they erased me with silence. One morning, I found an old folder of vineyard documents while cleaning out my storage. Thinking they might still be useful, I drove them to the office. The new receptionist, young, bright-eyed, looked at me blankly. "I'm Meredith," I said softly, "Richard Lane's daughter." She tilted her head, genuinely puzzled. "Oh, I didn't know he had a daughter." Her words cut deeper than any insult ever could. Later that day, I ran into Hector, one of the longtime harvest supervisors who used to work beside me and my mother. "Did they remove my name from the company records?" I asked, already knowing the answer. He hesitated, then nodded. "Brandon thought it'd be cleaner that way," he said gently. "He's rebranding everything." Cleaner. Like I was a stain on their polished image. That evening, I brought my father his favorite cinnamon rolls, my mother's recipe. He took the box without even looking up, opened it, took a bite, and said, "Not bad." "Do you remember? She taught me that recipe when I was 10, I offered, hoping for something, anything. "You don't have to bring something every time," he muttered, still not meeting my eyes. "You don't have to try so hard." That line stayed with me for weeks. Because trying was all I had left, trying to matter, trying to be seen. Trying to hold on to a family that had long since let go. I used to believe silence was grace. But now I know it can also be cruelty, dressed in restraint. It was a quiet Tuesday afternoon when the package arrived. No return address, just my name, Meredith Lane, written in elegant, looping handwriting I hadn't seen in years. My hands shook as I opened it, revealing a small wooden box wrapped in a pale blue ribbon. Inside were two things, a faded letter tied with twine, and a tiny velvet pouch. The letter came first. The paper was thick, slightly yellowed, the ink softened by time. At the top, in delicate cursive, was my name. Meredith. I pressed the page to my chest and wept. I hadn't seen my mother's handwriting since their last birthday card she gave me. I unfolded the letter slowly. "My dearest girl. If you're reading this, then I'm already gone, and that thought alone breaks my heart. There are things I should have said, but I didn't know how. I saw the way your father stopped seeing you. I saw Brandon push you aside, piece by piece. And I saw you stay kind anyway, stay present, stay loyal. Even when no one gave you a reason to. Please know I always saw you. You were never invisible to me." I wiped my eyes, then reached for the pouch. Inside was a small brass key, the kind used for safety deposit boxes. The next day, I called Mr. Wilkins, the family attorney. He sounded surprised, but not unkind. "I was wondering when I'd hear from you," he said. I brought him the letter and the key. He opened a drawer, pulled out a packet of documents, and began reading silently. He nodded as he flipped through each page. When he finished, he looked up. "This changes everything." I didn't speak. I didn't need to. Because for the first time in years, I wasn't asking for anything. I was standing on what had already been given, what was rightfully mine. And this time I wouldn't let anyone bury it. We didn't make an announcement. There was no dramatic confrontation, no shouting in boardrooms or arguments over wine barrels. Instead, I asked Mr. Wilkins to arrange a private meeting, just me, Brandon, and our respective attorneys. Neutral ground, no cameras, no vineyard ghosts. It was time to have a conversation not about revenge but about recognition. On the morning of the meeting, I dressed simply. Black slacks, a soft cream blouse, and my mother's silver pendant at my collarbone. I didn't want to look intimidating. I wanted to look unshakable. The meeting room was quiet when I arrived. Brandon stood as I entered, reflex, not respect, and offered a stiff nod. His lawyer, a young man in an overpriced suit named Ross, shuffled through folders and cleared his throat. Mr. Wilkins started with the basics. He laid out the paperwork, my mother's written directive, notarized and dated, my father's video statement recorded weeks before his passing, the transfer of ownership documents that had been kept in a sealed file. Everything was legal, clean, undeniable. Ross tried to raise questions. Intent, he said, doesn't always translate to enforceability. Mr. Wilkins didn't blink. In this case, it does. Brandon stayed silent, but I could see the tension in his jaw. The same jawline as our father, but softer now. Tired. Finally, he spoke. Why now, Meredith? I looked at him, really looked, and realized I felt no anger, just truth. We had ever left, Brandon, I said. I was erased, slowly, deliberately, and I let it happen because I thought if I stayed quiet, I might still belong. He lowered his eyes. But then Mom left me the key to the vineyard, to the truth, and I remembered who I was. I turned to Mr. Wilkins. I'm not here to destroy anything. I'm here to reclaim what my parents intended, my mother's half, my name, my place. Mr. Wilkins nodded. That's well within your legal right. Brandon leaned back, rubbed his temples. What do you want to do with it? He asked, not with anger, but with something closer to surrender. I paused. I want to restore Caroline's light, bring back the community harvest days, reopen the tasting room, reinstate staff bonuses. This isn't about undoing your work, it's about restoring what made this place a home. He looked at me for a long moment, then said softly, You sound like Mom. She never left me, I said, even when you did. A long silence followed. Mr. Wilkins slid the folder forward. All we need is a signature. Brandon didn't argue. He signed, then passed it to me. And just like that, after years of silence, omission, and quiet betrayal, I was written back in. Not as a guest, not as a relic, but as an equal. The ink on the papers had barely dried when I began the real work, not of reclaiming control, but of reviving something that had long been buried, the soul of the vineyard. I didn't march into meetings or redecorate the office overnight. I started small. I reopened an old joint account my mother and I had used years ago. Quietly, I hired a vineyard assessor to review the land's condition, not to interfere, just to prepare. I made a list of former staff who had worked beside me and my mother. Hector, Alma, Gwen, even one of the old delivery drivers. We met over coffee, not to dig up gossip but to listen. Hector was the first to speak plainly. It doesn't feel like it used to, he said. The bonuses are gone. Morale is low. The land, it's treated like a number now, not a legacy. Then, something I didn't expect. If you came back, he said quietly, I think a lot of us would follow. His words sat with me for days. Meanwhile, Mr. Wilkins prepared a formal motion to validate my full shareholder rights. The process was quiet, respectful, clipped into manila folders and certified envelopes. But within those pages was a shift in power, one built not on noise but on clarity. In one envelope, I received a stack of financial documents, quarterly reports, shareholder updates, brand transition statements. Buried within them, I found the truth I feared. Brandon had not just removed my name. He had rebranded the entire estate as a father-son operation. My mother's name was scrubbed from every label, every marketing brief, every inch of the website. Caroline's Light had been discontinued and replaced with a flashy cabernet called Dynasty, complete with a glossy backstory about bold legacy and male lineage. It was like she never existed. I didn't rage. Instead, I got to work. I created a proposal to bring back Caroline's Light using my mother's original recipe and handwritten tasting notes. I drafted a profit-sharing plan for long-standing employees and a vision for converting the unused barrel shed into a community space. But most of all, I restored my mother's presence. One evening, Alma called. Her voice was shaky. "There's something you need to see," she said. I met her at the old house behind the vineyard. She handed me a small tin box and a leather-bound journal, my mother's. Inside the journal were pages of vineyard notes, staff feedback, soil summaries, goals for the future. On the final page, she had written, "If they ever forget what matters here, remind them, this land was built by hands, not titles." In the box were letters. Dozens of them. From my mother to my father, begging him to see me, to not let legacy blind him to love. She had fought for me, even in silence. That night I cried not from grief but from the weight of knowing I had never been alone. I just hadn't seen the proof until now. 1 week after the documents were finalized and my name restored, I received a letter in the mail. No envelope, just a folded piece of lined paper slipped quietly into my mailbox. The handwriting was unmistakable Brandon's. It read, "Meredith, I don't know the right words. I've spent weeks trying to say something that doesn't sound like too little, too late. But here it is, I was wrong. About you, about Mom, about everything. I thought I was protecting the vineyard. I thought I was doing what Dad wanted. But somewhere along the way, I stopped seeing you. Maybe I never really did. I know you don't need this, but I'm saying it anyway. I'm sorry. If you're open to it, I'd like to walk the vineyard with you one day. No lawyers, no board. Just brother and sister. If not, I understand. Brandon." I read it 3 times. It didn't spark anger or triumph or even relief. It stirred something quieter. Not forgiveness, not yet. But maybe the sound of a door creaking open. A week later, I wrote back, "Brandon, I got your letter. I appreciate it. I'll be walking the South Fields this Saturday at 4. You're welcome to join. If not, that's okay too. Meredith." I didn't expect him to come. But at 3:58, his car pulled into the edge of the gravel drive. He stepped out alone, no blazer, no mask of confidence, just jeans and an old windbreaker. He looked older than I remembered, not from time but from being humbled. He didn't speak. He just fell into step beside me. And we walked. We walked the southern rows in silence, the grape leaves tinged with early signs of autumn, deep reds, golds, a soft wind rustling through. Brandon stopped beside an old post, the one where our mother used to tie little flags to mark which vines needed extra care. He smiled faintly. "Do you remember when Mom gave us that little basket and told us to find the most dignified grape?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I laughed. We had no idea what that meant. We just picked whatever looked shiny. "She just needed to keep us occupied," he said, but it felt like magic back then. We stood there a moment longer. Then he turned to me, his expression more sincere than I had ever seen. "I tried so hard to be like Dad," he admitted. "I thought that's what the vineyard needed, someone decisive, in charge. I thought soft meant weak." He looked at the vines. "But I see now I was wrong. You were the one who understood this place. Mom did, too." I didn't interrupt. I let him say it. "I'm not angry anymore," I said finally. "But I won't pretend it didn't cost me something." He nodded. "I know." We didn't hug. We didn't cry. But we stood side by side, breathing in the scent of crushed soil and fading summer. Before we turned back, Brandon gestured toward a patch of blooming purple. "Is that wild verbena?" "It is," I said. "I planted it for Mom. She always loved it." "She would have liked that," he said. "She did," I replied softly. "That's why I planted it." We didn't need anything more.
Sometimes peace doesn't come with closure. It comes with recognition. As we reached the end of the row, I glanced back at the field golden, quiet and fully mine again. Not through conquest, not through vengeance.
Through presence. Through remembering. Through finally being seen. There was no parade. No breaking news. No sudden shift in town gossip. Just slow, steady change. The vineyard's visitor center was renamed quietly the Caroline Lane House, a tribute carved into oak, hung just above the front doors. The first time I saw it, I stopped mid-step, breath caught in my throat, not from sorrow, but from a deep, unexpected relief. Something had finally been set right. The wine label Caroline's Light was brought back into production, using my mother's original tasting notes. I placed a framed photo of her beside the first new batch. The staff clapped. A few cried. I did too. I took over as head of heritage operations. It wasn't just a title, it was a responsibility I carried with both pride and peace. I reopened the old community programs, brought back the harvest fairs, and started featuring local artisans in our events. It wasn't about rebuilding what Brandon had made. It was about restoring what had been lost. People talked. Some whispered that I must have threatened legal action. Others assumed I had blackmailed my way in. I didn't correct them. Let them wonder. Because I wasn't here to prove anything anymore. One early morning, as the sun rose over the south fields, I walked alone along the fence line. The wind chime my mother once hung near the garden clinked softly. The verbena was in full bloom, swaying gently under the golden light. A young girl, Sarah, one of the tasting staff's daughters, ran up barefoot, holding a sticky handful of fresh grapes. "Miss Meredith," she grinned, "do you want to see the jam we made?" I smiled, heart full. "I'd love to."
As we walked back toward the house, I glanced over my shoulder one last time.
This place, once a symbol of exile, was home again. Not because they had finally invited me back, but because I stopped waiting for permission to belong. I returned as I was soft, steady, and unshakable.
And this time, I wasn't leaving a door cracked behind me. This time, I stayed. There are moments in life that don't announce themselves with trumpets. No thunderclap, no applause. They arrive quietly in the form of a letter in your mailbox, a forgotten notebook, a walk through old soil, and you don't realize until later that everything changed. For me, it wasn't the courtroom documents, it wasn't the signatures or the reinstated title. It was the quiet return. It was standing in the vineyard I once nurtured as a girl and realizing I didn't need to fight for a place in it anymore. I had become the place. I no longer needed my brother's approval or my father's validation. I didn't wait for anyone to remember me. I remembered myself. Not the helper, not the afterthought, not the invisible daughter in the background of family photos. Just Meredith Lane, present, planted, and no longer fading. I used to think revenge meant destruction, something sharp and loud. But I've learned that sometimes the most powerful form of revenge is simply thriving in peace, in presence, in truth. If this story touched you, leave a comment below. Tell us where you're watching from or share your own story of quiet strength. And if you believe in standing tall after being forgotten, like, share, subscribe.